A Sacramento family spent years searching for their grandparents' graves.
And our investigation uncovered the Catholic Diocese of Sacramento moved their remains, but can't say exactly where.
I would like to know exactly where my grandparents are laying to rest.
Margot Villegas' grandparents were buried at Sacramento St. Joseph Cemetery during the Great Depression. Decades later, in the 1960s, the Catholic Church decided this part of the cemetery was better suited for a school. The cemetery dug up and moved the remains of Mauricio and Maria Galvez and somewhere between 100 and 150 others to make room for this building, Bishop Manogue High School, which has since closed. Limited cemetery records do not say exactly where Mauricio and Maria's remains ended up. Cemetery management turned to maps Sacramento's Historical Society created in the 1980s and compared them to the cemetery's own records, suspecting this area, labeled Dorm 4, houses the moved graves.
We were very shocked to find out they were here in this area.
Just look around. Headstones are randomly scattered. The dirt is sunken.
I have to stand in this edge here and say, okay, somewhere in here are my grandparents' remains.
The cemetery found this marker for Margot's grandfather, but none could be found for her grandmother. And Margot doesn't trust it marks where her grandparents are buried.
I don't think any of these souls should be disrespected like this in this area. That in the mid-1960s, we were not the Dark Ages. This thing should have been taken care of properly.
Moving graves is part of California history. In the 1930s, voters in San Francisco approved relocating 150,000 graves from valuable city land to neighboring Colma. Before Folsom Lake was flooded in the 1950s, the government moved graves to the Mormon Island Relocation Cemetery in El Dorado Hills. As recently as 2005, the expansion of the UC Davis Cancer Center required the movement of 72 indigent graves to Sacramento St. Mary's Cemetery, where more than 10,000 indigents are buried. All of this begs the question, if you buried your loved one today, what's to say years from now somebody doesn't want to do something else with that land? Like build a school or a freeway, dig up their remains and move them somewhere else. When you bury a loved one in a cemetery, you feel like that's going to be their final resting place.
Yes.
What's the reality?
In most cases, that's true.
Death care expert Valerie Rose with American River College says the state now has restrictions when it comes to moving graves from municipal and private cemeteries. California has a cemetery and funeral bureau which oversees cemeteries, but we learned not in this case because California has zero jurisdiction over religious cemeteries. If the Catholic Church tomorrow decided they wanted to build a school on one of their cemeteries, they legally could move those graves.
Yes. Yes.
So would they? The Bishop of the Diocese of Sacramento, Jaime Soto, would not sit down with us to answer that question, nor would anyone from cemetery and funeral services for the diocese. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops ignored our repeated written requests for an answer. However, in this particular case, Scott Miller, who operates St. Joseph Cemetery, says poor record keeping was a factor in the graves moved to make room in the 60s for Bishop Manogue High School. Based on the records they did have, in July, his team randomly dug up 3 areas of the cemetery a few feet down. Cemetery staff supplied Margot these photos of what is left of tightly laid wooden boxes and bone fragments and determined it is reasonable to believe that all individuals laid to rest here were disinterred and reinterred in this location prior to construction of Bishop Manogue High School. It is also reasonable to believe that the headstones do not directly correspond to the remains buried directly below them in most cases.
I'm very disappointed and saddened. They were moved carelessly, that they were just randomly turned side to side, every which way they fit.
Margot wants the Catholic Church to pay for DNA testing, hoping to know the place where she leaves flowers is at least close to her grandparents' final resting place.
There's a lot of souls here being brought here thinking that this is where their final resting place would be, in an area that is a respected cemetery. The Catholic Diocese is amiss in this area, and that they disrespected so many souls.
Well, DNA expert tells me if Margot's grandparents were embalmed, the DNA would have essentially been erased. Now, after we started investigating, signs went up in that section of St. Joseph Cemetery saying they are removing all headstones from this section, adding soil to level the area, and will then reset all headstones. The project will begin between November 1st and November 18th and is scheduled to be completed prior to Christmas. Now, we have given the cemetery staff, the Catholic Diocese of Sacramento, and the Conference of Bishops repeated opportunities to say something like this would never happen again, but they never did.
And that leaves so many here watching thinking, what if I have questions? What if somebody that I love is buried in a cemetery that maybe you've listed or you've mentioned? How can they verify? Is there any way to know?
As of right now, there is no regulation of religious cemeteries.
Wow.
So if you are buried in a private cemetery or a municipal cemetery, maybe a county or a city runs it, there are state regulations.
Sure.
But if it is a religious cemetery, hands off. The Cemetery and Funeral Bureau has zero jurisdiction over them.
Eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah.
All right, great investigation, Kurtis.